Hey there, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see somewhere behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So you're looking for a bit of a different and unusual plant, something that's not the standard, Monstera deliciosa or an anthurium or a philodendron. You want something truly a bit unique. I have done a bit of a series on this, and I will be putting this in a playlist and linking it at the top there so you can see the previous two videos. I think I've already got plans for an unusual orchid video coming soon, but this is the continuation and the third video in the unusual houseplant series. And boy oh boy do I have a bit of a collection for you, and it is a good mix of plants. I have got certain plants that you've probably never heard of before necessarily, some that can work in both household conditions and in the garden here in the UK. Not saying that all of these are necessarily hardy, but they are plants that, as long as they are treated okay outside even in the winter and they don't get too much frost, they could be okay to survive the winter. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about things like the mastic plant, and I did mention this on my plant panel video, and some of the people who were there for the premiere, who were originally from Greece, knew a lot about that plant as well. And if you didn't see the plant panel video, it's linked at the top there. So another one that I'm going to be talking about is something that's commonly known as the hardy tapioca or Manihot grahamii. I am completely butchering that name, but you're going to love some of these names that I'm going to be saying today, especially the Latin names. There's a Euphorbia in here as well. There is an Alocasia in here as well, but not like an Alocasia that you might have seen before. And I've also got an ivy, unlike any ivy you've seen before. But without further ado, let's dive into the first plant. So I did mention about something that is called the hardy something. So this, I think the common name, if I'm not mistaken, is hardy tapioca, and this is the Manihot grahamii. As I said, probably butchering that name. And I will be putting close-ups of this plant so you can see what I mean by this entirely. And this is a plant that I got from a local plant store, which I know ships to the whole of the UK. I know there's a lot of people that were looking for this plant, so when it comes onto their website, it goes quite quickly. So I was quite fortunate to get one of these last year. And you might be able to see why. I did see this a while ago, and I'll show you one of the first leaves that come out. It looks like a leaf that just has a lot of... One leaf has got quite a lot of little leaflets essentially on it, but where it really does start showing why people like it is when you start seeing the slightly more mature leaves. And as I said, this one was one of the first leaves that it got after the winter. And this is the plant that did survive kind of outdoors, even in the UK in the winter. I did have this in my unheated greenhouse. Yes, the greenhouse was bubble wrapped and everything like that. And I did really pull back on the watering, but it survived the winter. I am very glad to say, because I wasn't too sure if it would. The seller, Carl, did mention that these plants can be garden plants as well. They just need to mature a bit more. I don't know. I don't think this is quite ready to be out permanently, but I also know that these grow quite happily indoors as well, year round. But the leaves are just where it's at, because the reason why I got this is because I like the look of the leaves. It does grow a bit like a tree, but the leaves do look, and I don't think there's a better way of me describing this. I don't know whether or not at Christmas you ever made those kind of things where you fold the paper up and you cut little slits into the paper and then you unfold it and it's like a snowflake. It is giving those kind of vibes, and it is exceptionally cool, I think. But not the easiest plants to grow, I'm not going to lie. Even in a household environment, I know that some people will struggle with this plant. And the one thing I have learned this year, I did see online that this is a plant that needs bright light. Obviously, if it's in the garden, that's not a problem. If it's in the house, you probably need to give it as bright of a light as you possibly can. Last year, I didn't think that advice was great because it was kind of struggling a bit, but it changed environments, and I got it towards around this time of the year, actually. I think towards the end of the summer, beginning of autumn. So it was already starting to wind down. Now that I've had a full growing season with this plant. Very cool. You might be able to see, and I'll see if I can insert a video so you can see. It looks a bit, there's a ficus that usually looks like bodies, like the actual trunk of it, and it's usually sold in little bonsais. I'll see if I can find what it's called. I think it might even be a graft of a couple of plants that is usually sold in small plant pots. This is very similar. It's got that kind of voluptuous kind of body vibes that's happening there, but obviously if it's a tapioca, it will have a bit more of a swollen kind of base, really. And for the people that know, generally with tapioca, some of the times some of them are edible. I don't think this is edible necessarily. I think this is very much more so of an ornamental plant, but a very, very different looking plant. The thing I will say as well about this, in the winter, obviously outdoors, it did drop all of its leaves. I haven't grown this indoors over winter purely because I don't have the space, and it can survive outdoors. So I'm going to take that opportunity where I can, because I just don't have that much space anymore indoors. But this might also keep its leaves through the winter. If you do have this plant, if you're one of the few people that do have this plant and you have grown it indoors, even in the winter, please do drop a comment down below. I would like to know as much as anybody else watching this video. But yeah, a very cool and unusual plant. Now I want to move on to a plant that's quite similar, that kind of ferny, but more palmate leaves. So kind of look a bit more like a palm. But interestingly enough, and sorry, some of these leaves are a bit crispy, I will add pictures of my mother plant when it was doing really, really well. And I did get a bit confident with that one because I don't know why everybody else is struggling and how everybody else's ones is rotting down to the core and they have to start over again. That's exactly what happened with this. But I will put a picture here to see what the mother plant was like and quite how large it got. Ignore some of these leaves, it was growing a bit too close to the sun. It's a bit like Icarus. But you can see here what the leaves look like. I will also insert some other pictures so you can see it in more of its glory, and also what the stems or the petioles specifically would be on this plant. The big thing obviously that you can see is it's unlike any other alocasia that you might be aware of, because most alocasias kind of have shield-like leaves or kind of heart-shaped leaves, but none of them really have fenestrations or splits down the leaves as far as I am aware. This one does. So that's the really, really cool thing about this. In terms of its care, very, very similar to usual alocasias. So anything that applies to alocasia care would apply to this. I will link a video up at the top there when I did my alocasia video care, because I know a lot of people just, how do you always manage to keep alocasias? I do the things that I mentioned in that video. So go and have a look at that if you want. But with this plant, it has been my most fussy alocasia. Even with other ones, when I make a bit of a mistake, they'll bounce back quite quickly. This one was a bit more unforgiving. It was a lot more rare when it came out into the market a couple of years ago, but actually I think I've seen this at least here in the UK, and I would imagine in Europe as well. It has become a lot more available. So I don't know if I mentioned this at the beginning of this section, but this is the Alocasia Brancifolia pink passion. And the pinkness, you'll be able to see from this picture why it's got that part of the name. But yeah, this was one that was truly quite difficult to find back then. The story that I heard from a very dear friend who had a plant shop at that point was because essentially they saw it, they found it from one of the people in the Netherlands that originally made the cross. So I think this is a cross between different types of alocasias. Obviously they weren't going to share which alocasias they crossed to get this, but they're the only ones that had stock of this plant. So they were a bit better at manipulating the market, so to speak, in terms of not releasing too many into the market and not flooding the market so they could keep the costs up. There's a lot more that have come onto the market, and the price of this has become a lot more affordable, at least here in the UK, and I would assume in the EU. Very, very cool, very different looking alocasia. And I will say, in relation to other kind of palm-like houseplants that you might have, and they can be a bit temperamental at times, this one is probably a bit easier. Still a bit challenging at times, but a bit easier. And yeah, in terms of its light conditions, it likes what most alocasias like, which is bright indirect light. This one was one of the few alocasias, and it makes sense because there's a lot less leaf on them, that it kind of wants even brighter light if you can give it, because obviously there's large chunks of the leaves that are missing. Moving on to a plant that is a bit different. I will try to lift this up, and I will warn you the bottom bit is quite crispy, but you might be able to see, yeah, there you go. The crispiness is there at the bottom. This is the Bryony-Leaved Flowering Ivy. It is a succulent plant, and again, I'll insert close-up videos throughout this section so you can see it has got leaves that look very similar to ivy leaves, a lot smaller, and they can size up. I've given it something to climb up, and it's doing really well. You can also let this trail. This could also be a nice trailing plant. It has got some silveriness on the leaves, which is really, really quite unique, and the back sides are a very, very deep purple. I did also talk about this with Jane Perrone on the episode that we did together, and I will link it down in the description below. If you've not had a chance to check that out, please do. This would also be the time when the heavens decide to open up and there's a deluge of water falling all around the conservatory. Hopefully you can still hear me and there isn't too much noise, and hopefully I can edit it out in the editing process. But if not, this might be a voiceover-y bit. But yeah, the leaves are very, very cool. As I said, silver, purple backs. It grows super fast. This was tiny when I first got it about a year ago, and I'll see if I can add a picture here of when I first got it. This isn't a particularly difficult plant to come by in the UK, at least. It wasn't a particularly expensive plant. I got this from a local garden centre. They do come out from the Netherlands, at least here in the UK, and I would imagine in Europe quite frequently. But by frequently, I mean once a year or twice a year. It's a bit more staggered because I don't think there's that many people that are keen on this. However, I will say I do like the look of an ivy plant. Anybody that's been here for a while will know that I consider ivy a weed in my garden of the house that I just bought a few years ago now. I am growing this plant in pond because it was so thirsty. For such a succulent plant, it is exceptionally thirsty. But a very, very cool one, especially if you like ivy. In my garden, I consider ivy, true ivy, so Hedera helix, to be a weed, at least here in the UK. So I would never put that in my house. It's also a spider mite magnet in the house. This one, I can very happily say, has almost been entirely pest-free. I just spotted a singular mealybug just a moment ago, and I will be kind of dealing with it early because I don't want this to get ridiculous, but this is not with all the rest of my plants in my conservatory, which generally has a bit of an issue with mealybugs. This is somewhere else entirely, so it does great in household humidity. I mean, it's a succulent looking plant. If I'm not mistaken, you wouldn't really be faulted for thinking this is part of the Senecio or the Curio type of plants. So the string of hearts, the string of, actually not the string of hearts, the string of pearls, the string of dolphins, the string of bananas, all of the strings basically. But yeah, very, very, very cool plant. And it gives you that ivy look and feel without it being as temperamental as an ivy indoors. The next plant I want to talk about is a Euphorbia, and I don't have it here because I have since gifted this because it was part of a larger plant arrangement, and I will put the plant arrangement here so you can see it. It's a succulent arrangement, and I've gifted this to a friend, but I do have some pictures of when I still did have it in my care, and I will add them throughout this section of the video. But essentially, this is the Euphorbia platyclada, and a lot of people kind of use a common term for this one. It's the Euphorbia dead sticks. And if you're looking at the picture now, you'll kind of understand where it's getting its common name from. I'm not going to lie, this isn't going to be for everybody. But for somebody that truly does want a bit of a unique looking plant, it's also, even by Euphorbia or succulent type plants, this doesn't have a lot of deep watering requirements, if that makes sense. So you can let it dry out for a bit longer and it will be fine. It kind of branches out. It kind of brings little kind of tiny flowers on all those little notches that you might be able to see. But it is very cool and it is very unusual. As I said, this is what we say in the UK. It might be a bit of a Marmite situation. So you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it. But if you're somebody who really does go for that truly unusual look to the plant, and obviously this is going to be the plant when somebody walks into your house, they're going to be like, why is that plant dead? And you can be like, it's not dead. It's meant to look like that. And the thing obviously with plants like that do appear like they might be dead and they might just be sticks is you would imagine if there's any kind of animal, pest or predator essentially that might be chewing on leaves in and around where this plant might be growing naturally. If I'm not mistaken, this is a plant that is native to Madagascar. And I think in nature, it might be kind of a bit of an endangered plant at the moment. I might be wrong. If I am wrong, I will correct myself up there. But Yeah, very, very cool plant and very, very different looking. And obviously it's kind of adapted to avoid those kind of animals that might want to chew on its leaves or possibly even pests it by just looking like it might be dead, basically. But very, very cool plant and easy to care for as well. So possibly one to consider. Obviously it's a succulent type plant, so bright light is where it loves to be. Moving on to another succulent type plant, and you might be able to see this here. This is commonly known as the pregnant onion, and its scientific name, if I'm not mistaken, is Albuca bractea, if I'm not mistaken. I will put it up in the corner as well, but let me show you why this is called a pregnant onion. I'll try to move it around and move some of the other leaves. Can you see that main plant that does look like an onion? And can you see right there attached to it? This is one that I did not pull off. It does get these little baby onions almost growing in between those layers there, and it looks like little bumps. It looks like it's got little spots, and they are little other pregnant onions. And a lot of them will fall into the soil, and you can see all these kind of thinner leaves are its progeny that's fallen into the soil and it's kind of grown out. And the one that I was showing you before is one that really didn't detach. So you can see there's a second one almost growing off the side of it. This is a very cool plant. Granted, again, this might be one that might be a bit of that Marmite situation. It might not be for everybody because it truly does look like an onion. But it's a very cool one to have somewhere maybe in your kitchen because it's got that onion thing and the cooking thing. This isn't edible. However, I was doing some research on this plant. I've mentioned this on previous videos. Some of the locals to where this plant will grow naturally have been using the sap of these leaves for kind of insect bites. I think possibly also to kind of draw out poisons from snakes. I might be wrong about that one, but I'm definitely sure it's something to do with dealing with insect bites. And I will say this is a cool one because if you use some of that sap like you would from an aloe vera, for instance, on something like a mosquito bite, it does help to alleviate that itch factor there. So kind of cool. I like houseplants that have got a bit of use to them as well, not just looking pretty. But very, very cool plant nonetheless. Does it get a bit sprawly and unwieldy? Yes. I have had this plant now, I think, going on 3 to 4 years, so this is quite an established plant. I could probably get this to be bigger if I could bothered to repot this. I am pretty sure this is very pot bound, but I don't want it to necessarily get much, much bigger. And just to be clear, can you see the little plantlets here that I'm pointing out with the little leaves? That's how this was when I first got it. So it was somebody else's pregnant onion's progeny when I first got it, and it has grown quite nicely. There is also, ooh, let me see if I can bring that in so you might be able to see. I don't know whether or not this will show up there. You might be able to see there is an inflorescence, which I need to chop off because if I don't chop it off, it will take away energy from the foliage. It's not anything particularly exciting. This is obviously an albuca, an albuca. I don't know how to pronounce that, but it's related to the plant that commonly you might find in nurseries or garden centers called the frizzle sizzle, if I'm not mistaken, which is very similar looking caudex plant, and the leaves curl into little curls. I don't have one of those. That's another unusual looking plant to consider purchasing. Okay, moving on to another plant, you might be able to see it peeking out from there, and the people that have been here for a while probably know why I don't do these videos very often, because a lot of these unusual plants also grow in really awkward ways or in interesting ways, so it's difficult for me to kind of get them out from their permanent location, which might be jammed against walls and things like that, or against windows, to show them to you, because let me show you this one. So this is the mastic plant, or the mastic tree eventually it will turn into, and its scientific name is Pistachius lentissimus or something along those lines. I can never pronounce this properly. I will put it up here. And again, for the people that were here for the plant panel talk, and I'll link the video at the top if I haven't already. I think I might have mentioned this in the previous part of this video, so there is a link somewhere on this video. So you can see the plant panel talk with this one. This is a very, very cool plant, especially if you are from around the Med, so Greece. This is a very, very important plant to us. some of the Arabic nations as well, and I will tell you why. Let me put this down and I will intersperse clips of the plant so you can kind of look at it whilst I am talking. So the mastic plant is very important to us culturally, and I can talk from the Greek side of things. I'm pretty sure this applies to some of the Arabic nations as well. If you've ever had baklava and you cannot place a specific flavor, it's slightly floral, it's because it's mastic gum that is ground up into a powder and added in to give flavor. Mastic gum, at least in my region of the world, was also one of these things that was the original chewing gum. It's a gum, basically, so you pop it in the mouth and start chewing on it. It might be a bit hard and a bit crumbly in the beginning, but eventually it turns into a version of what you would imagine being very early chewing gum. So the interesting thing about this plant, and that's why I was really excited when I first found it, is because I found it in the UK. Never thought I was going to find this plant in the UK. They're very difficult to find in Greece. I was corrected during that plant panel to say that they can grow everywhere in Greece, but there is one specific island and one specific region of the island called Chios in Greece, where all the rest of I think it's part of the Aegean, I might be wrong, but essentially that's where this plant grows a lot. That's where it generates the resin. I thought it was something to do with the age of the plant, that maybe Chios had the conditions that it could grow. That's why I was really surprised that it was growing in the UK. That lovely follower was kind of saying, actually, no, it will grow everywhere in Greece. It probably means it will grow in similar environments, kind of in the Middle East. But Chios, this island, is one of the few places in the world where the resin will crystallize, which I thought was really, really interesting. So obviously they're doing research to find out why this happens in that specific location. And this is something that I thought was quite interesting, because something to be aware of, and I mentioned this again during that plant panel video, it's a crying shame because there's a lot of bushfires that have happened recently in Greece, and I think a third or 2/3 of the kind of plantations where they had these plants have since burned, and it takes them years to get them to the point where they can create the resin. That resin was ridiculously expensive before. It's even more so now because there's less production happening because there's less of these plants. Now, for your household environment, the interesting thing about this plant is just looking at it, especially when it's in a small form, if you can come across it, it does really look like a bit of an olive tree. So it's got that gnarly kind of bark that's happening, and the leaves are very olive leaf looking. Obviously you won't get olives on this. The leaves as well, and I will insert hopefully a video over this so you can see how they grow, because I'm still not entirely sure if it's stems that have a petiole that has little leaflets, but you'll see because there's like a ridge of leaf that's happening on what kind of looks a bit like a petiole. So very cool plant. And a bit of a backstory. Another little bit of a really cool information for my Greek followers will probably appreciate this a bit more than everybody else because we're so used to these plants. I had a follower reach out and said, yes, I recognize this plant because I do landscaping for a living, and we use the mastic plant as a landscaping plant in Vegas, which I thought was amazing. So yeah, but a very cool plant nonetheless. Maybe not for everybody, but I think most of these plants on this video are going to be a bit like, you either love them or you hate them. And I'll wrap up with a plant that I don't have here to show you, but I have got clips. I also do have care videos for this plant, because when I first got it, and by the way, the plant that I'm talking about is the spiral ginger, or the Costus arabica variegata, because I've got the variegated spiral ginger. Very cool plant. I don't know whether I'm going to have any pictures that are going to truly show the spiraling of this plant, but by all means, do a quick Google search and search for spiral ginger. It looks amazing the way that it will grow, and it kind of corkscrews up, and you get leaves going all around that corkscrew. It's very cool. Didn't have a lot of information when I first purchased it on how to grow it happily in an environment. That's why I did that care video. But since then, I will quite gladly say I think it was kind of almost to my height at some point in the conservatory, and it was growing in a trough, and it was huge and wide. And hopefully I'll be able to put some videos in here. It has since transitioned to living in the soil outside in my garden in the UK. I'm fully aware that this might mean that the plant will perish over the winter, but it is one of the plants that I'm okay if it retires. It's fine. I grew it. I love this plant. It's great in the garden as well. The really interesting thing in the garden is I'm getting it to bloom, and just wow. The smell of the blooms, I don't even know how to describe it. It's just very tropical. So, you know, sometimes when you get very fragrant tropical fruits like a guava or anything like that, that can be very, very intensely floral, very similar to that, but just really, really pleasant as well. The blooms look interesting. It's nothing kind of spectacular, but very, very, very interesting. It's not a true ginger, because this took me a while when I first got it. I didn't know much about this, but I think true gingers are the gingers that are edible. So this is not an edible root ginger, but very, very cool plant nonetheless, and definitely a bit of a talking point. It isn't the easiest to get particularly happy, but the moment that you kind of get there, you're just like, oh, okay, fine, I'll just keep doing this and this plant will go into a bush, basically. But very, very cool plant nonetheless. If you do come across it, at least in the UK and Europe, I'm seeing this come up a lot more frequently now than I did when I first got it a year or two ago, actually. So, and it was interesting because the person that gave this to me was just like, I can't grow this. Everything that I've tried isn't growing. You're good at this. Take it. I got it to work. Yeah, people that have been here for a while know. Difficult plants. Give me a difficult plant. I will make it thrive. Give me the easiest plant that everybody else can keep alive. I will kill in the blink of an eye. But yeah, that was the last one I wanted to talk about during this video. Hopefully you've enjoyed. If you want, let me know which one was your favorite in the comments down below. If you've got some interesting plants that you might think that people should be aware of, do drop that in the comments down below. And one final thing that you can drop in the comments down below, if you like this series, let me know. I've got, as I said, there's a weird orchid video coming up, but do you want me to keep making this? Generally the response from these videos has been really, really good. So hopefully if you want me to, I'll make more of these. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.